Good morning, good afternoon, however you are joining us today. Thanks for making us part of your Tuesday. We're glad to have each and every one of you with us. Summer's always a crazy time. We never know who's going to show, who's going to come, who's going to watch later. And so we've got a handful here today, and we're excited for you guys taking time out of your schedule to be with us today. I'm going to call on Andrew Peters in just a moment. Andrew, it's good to see you. I want you to open us up in a word of prayer. Josh is gone today. Jeremy's gone. Kylie and I are holding down the fort. We've got Jim Childs with us again this week. Going to target another specific topic relative to reaching the LGBTQ community. And I'm excited that Jim is with us again today. I'll kick things off to him in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's start with a word of prayer. Andrew, if you don't mind leading us. Andrew Peters, can you hear me? Oh, maybe some technical difficulty there. Oh man, I lost him. But whoever I call in to pray next, Andrew Peters, can you hear me? I got you back there. I don't know if he can hear.
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know
Can you
why
hear
my
me?
computer keeps kicking me out and bringing me back in.
That's all right. The devil's already fighting. We would like for you to open us up in a word of prayer if you don't mind doing that this morning or this afternoon.
Yes, sir, will do. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we love you. And Lord, we thank you for those that have been able to take some time out of their day and come together, Lord, to look at some of these topics. Lord, I'm thankful for this group, thankful for the ministry of each and every person that's here on this Zoom call. Lord, teach us something today. Help us to find something that we can apply to our ministry, apply to our lives. And Lord, I pray that you grow us because of it. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Andrew. We're glad to have you guys with us today. One quick thing that I wanted to make you aware of on your calendar planning is July 19th. That is a Tuesday where we will have our very own Jeremy Rands is going to be giving a talk that day. And we are calling July 19th Friend Day. This is where you have the ability to invite someone to the virtual roundtable who does not normally come or is not in the network and does not have a paid membership. You get a one invitation week to invite them to come and join us, see what the network is all about. Rands is going to be sharing with us that week, and we're excited for that. So mark your calendars for July 19th. We're calling it Friend Day, and we want you to invite somebody who's not used to being with us on an average Tuesday. Today's not an average Tuesday. We've got Jim Childs, which becomes this is becoming a regular thing to have you with us, Jim. We're glad to have you here again today, helping with the LGBTQ webinar 2 weeks ago, doing a talk for us last week, and he's here again with us today. We talked last week about the pastor's perspective, and today Jim's going to tackle it from a little bit of a different angle on the parent's perspective. This is how you deal with parents in your church that may have someone that they love, someone that's in their family, maybe a child that's struggling with something like this. And so Jim's going to give us a little bit of wisdom today. Jim, we are so glad to have you with us again today. I'll let you take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, man. I'm starting to feel like part of the group here. So thanks for having me again today. This is great. Guys, I first, before I get started, I just wanted to let you know this is such an involved topic, not just parents, but the whole thing. And I just shot my email here in the chat, just so I want you to feel free to reach out to me at any point that you may have another question, deeper questions, want to continue the conversation with me, or talk about the seminar we do or workshops I do for pastors and staff. I just want to make sure you had that easily accessible. So feel free to utilize that. I'd love to hear from you if I can be of any service. Parents. So I have, as we've traveled the US for on this topic of doing the seminars, every church that we go to, and I'd say 100%, we get parents coming up to us after the seminar, during the seminar, saying, I'm so glad you're here. I have a son, daughter that has come out to me in some fashion, and they start telling their stories, but I've never been able to share it with anybody else, or nobody in my church knows. But thank you for being here. So now I can start talking about it, getting prayer support and all of those things. So that led me to understand the depth of how parents are dealing with the topic of LGBTQ, and especially when it hits home within their families. And they're always, always, always shocked. And I don't blame them, because they're probably looking for the wrong things. When I first shared my story with parents many years ago, it was in a parent sort of support group piece. And I first had them go around and share their story. And I was amazed at the depth of pain that they all expressed, talking about their son or daughter who was in a gay identity, living the lifestyle. And it impacted me so much. My parents are gone, but I went to the lady who was my partner's mother, that she still, even though he's passed, she still, calls me her son. I made a call to her and I said, I'm so sorry for what we put you through. I had no idea. So it just was a wake up call to me that this is such an impactful topic for parents as well. I just wanted to cover that for a moment. As pastors, what does that mean? Well, most of you are probably, is everybody here a parent? Or yeah, you all know them. So I'm going to kind of go at a couple of different angles, because if you're a parent, especially of young kids, this is something that is your kids are being exposed to, whether you even realize it or not, because of every aspect of culture has been infiltrated. So on this, I first thought it would be good, because I hear from parents. I tell you, there are so many conversations that I have, and I'm blessed to have them with parents, but I think, I wish this were happening in their pastor study. And I wonder if there's a disconnect, or if it's just they're so ashamed. I doubt it's lack of access to the pastor. In most cases, it's simply the parent doesn't know how to approach it. So I thought, from this angle, I would just give you some pointers, some things that I've heard from parents. Often when a parent has said they have approached either another church member or a parent or a pastor, they've gotten some responses that were less than helpful. So I guess I just want to say, when that parent does come to you and said, Pastor, my son or daughter, and this could be, you're going to have parents coming, either they're a preteen, parent of a preteen who says that their son or daughter is saying that they are identifying now or struggling with attraction or transgenderism. It could be teenagers, and could be adults. They're equally painful for these parents. My advice is first to minister to the heart of the parent. That should be a given, but often we want to go so far right to the solution. And what I've learned is, when people come to me, they don't want the solution quite yet. They need to know how to process. They're experiencing grief or stages of. This has changed their relationship with their child, whether it's an adult child or a minor. It is altering this, because now this new this declaration from the kid is actually, now the parent's like, wow, I didn't know this. I'm not sure how to get, I need to, how do I now, what about our relationship? How do I go forward with our relationship knowing this? So the confusion that goes along with it, we have to at first address the parent, just like we do in the, just like in an airplane, when they say, if the oxygen mask drops and you're traveling with the thing, put the mask on first. So we must address their parents, pray with them, pray for them, but pray with them for the situation, pray for their heart, pray for wisdom, understanding, compassion for them, pray for the kid, whatever age they are. But the prayer should be that the kid is reconciled with the heart with the Lord. What I tell you, but the parents that I get, they all tell me their child was raised in church, whatever level, many very active in their youth group, very active in even worship band, all of those things, has now pulled away from their faith in order to make this declaration to their parents. So what we do in our parents groups that I have, two of them, Monday and a Tuesday night group, there are 30 families represented in those groups. We pray every week for the kid. We pray for their reconciliation with the Lord, because nothing matters more than that. And we just need to remind parents of that piece of it. Now, there are some trends, and then pray for their family. So as you're ministering to parents, the other piece is that be aware that they are going to have, this needs to be something long-term. Now, you may not as a pastor have time, but have some resources at hand to help them navigate this. To say, oh, just share this with your small group, in so many cases just isn't effective enough, because for parents, this is a unique hurt. This is a unique situation, and they can use support from somebody who gets it as well, who has been there. And I'll just put it out there right now. I'm a resource right now, and I can connect you with other resources. So, but we can also connect them with other parents. So that's very important. You may know other parents in the group. One of the things I did at my church was I had about 5 different parents come to me over time, over about the course of a year. And finally it dawned on me, what if they want to get together? So I actually offered to each one individually, would you like to meet other parents within the church and meet with them? And you're probably going to know them, but I can't tell you who they are. But you probably want to know them, will know them. Are you willing? Would you like to? And that can provided incredible support for a period of time for those parents in person. Some of the trends that I'm hearing, heard this just last night from 2 different parents whose child is who's 7, I think they were 16-year-olds, just did this. They told their parents that they were struggling. Then they told their parent with their sort of identity, but they were very guarded and didn't want to talk about it. Then they revisited a little while later, like a couple of weeks later, they revisited with the parents, and these 2 parents were each able to talk to their kid more about the Lord and where was I think they asked, where's your faith right now with all of this? And they both said this, 2 different places, 2 different parts of the country. They said, I wish God hadn't made a tree of good and evil, for the knowledge of good and evil. I wish we had just had Eden and we could all live there always. Because then, and here's the caveat, because then I could live out my natural desires without guilt. They both had this same sort of twisted narrative. I share that as an example. It is out there. There's grooming. There are resources. There are that these kids have access to. And for parents to understand that this is a part of the sort of preventative piece, for parents to understand that the access that their kids have to seemingly innocuous TV shows, games, chat rooms, social media is not, it's harmful basically for anyone who's getting. So if you have a kid who feels out of place and he wants to go look any farther, he's got instant way of figuring out where to fit in. So when we say that 21% of the Gen Zers would say that they are identify as LGBT, sometimes it means that they just found a place to land, that they found community because they feel like an outcast and they're identifying as that. It doesn't always mean that they are embracing a gay life or a gay identity, but they might, because now they're embracing the ideology piece, and can be very much led into that. So with the parents, the big thing when a kid comes out to them and says, Mom and Dad, this is what's going on. The big thing for kids is for the parent first to say, we love you. I'm gonna back up for a minute, because if a parent comes to you, they probably already had the conversation with the kid, and they may have not done the way that maybe the best they could at it, but who has a manual for this? So remind them that they are parents and they can revisit this conversation, that they can lead this. That's the piece I've seen parents do. They throw up their hands. They're like, I don't know what to do now. I don't know how to parent. Can I give them guidelines? Can I still parent? Can I put boundaries up? So the parent to go back and make sure the kid knows that they love them regardless, and they want to be part of this journey, that they want to understand the journey. And the communication, it needs to be open enough for the kid to feel safe enough, as they will express it. Some kids won't. Obviously, teenagers are teenagers, right? So that's the thing thrown into this. But for teenagers especially, for parents to say, tell me about how you arrived here. Talk to me. I'm stunned at the number of people whose parents never knew about the molestation or acts of abuse that happened to their kid. I'm stunned, not that the parent did anything wrong by not knowing, but they just didn't know. And a little bit of digging can kind of help with that. One of the things to remember to parents is if they tell you that their kid you ask the questions. When your child said, "Mom and Dad, I think I'm gay. Mom and Dad, I think I'm trans," or "I'm questioning my gender," whatever that looks like. If they're using language that's not their normal way of talking, you can pretty much guess they've been groomed. And it's not a bad idea for the parent to ask them now, "Tell me more about this." If they dig, they can help the child actually dismantle some of the arguments they put up themselves, rather than the parent having to refute everything. By asking questions to understand, it actually causes the child to think through some of the stuff they're saying that they've actually been told to say. There are literally sites that you can go to that will tell you, if you are gay, here's a question, here's a test. If you're gay, and you tested that you're gay, so now here's some ways to tell your parents, and here's the way to take control. There is, I think I mentioned it last week, there's a book and it's out of print, so I'm trying to pray through this if I can use some excerpts from it or something, written in '89 by two activists. They're gay men, graduated from Harvard, wrote called After the Ball, and said, if you want to normalize homosexuality in this culture, here's what has to happen. And it's all happened. This was written in '89. It was almost like a manifesto, to be honest with you. But in there are some things that are stunningly, they're revelations, even then, about the underlying sort of pieces and mindset of gay activism. It talks about language. It talks about hitting the emotions. And here's where every kid that comes to their parents has been hit, is their emotions have been tapped in. They have seen the couple on television. They've seen a character that they've learned to look up to is now suddenly going to say, "I'm gay." They're being celebrated. The kid is being drawn in without even knowing it. And in the meantime, they go to church and they feel different. They feel other. They don't feel like they're fit in. They've been ridiculed, all those things. They don't understand creation. They don't understand God. They haven't grasped the concepts. So we're kind of leaving them out there because their emotions now are being tapped into. That's how the battle is being won. The cultural battle is being won, is let's construct these emotional arguments. And you can't really argue with those because they're slippery, right? And they're changing. And so logic doesn't really have a place. Kids don't have the ability to do that either, so they can be drawn in. So for parents, the kid's story is not over because they say, "Mom or Dad, I am gay." Parents do not ever need to put that language on them. Their kid, by the way. I was listening to a podcast and they kept talking about the parent of the parent of gay kids or an LGBTQ child. No, God doesn't see your child, any child, as gay or transgender. That's not a creation of God. The way that is not a construct. That is a human construct. God sees them as a boy or a girl that he created who needs guidance. As parents, we must encourage our parents to see their child as the male or female God created and to help them groom that. A couple of mistakes we might make if we think, "Uh-oh, John is looking a little too effeminate. Look what he's playing. He's playing with a doll." And then we say, "Hey, Johnny, boys don't play with dolls. Girls play with dolls. Let me give you another toy." So Johnny's mind, and that's a way of trying to redirecting. In Johnny's mind, he's like, "But I like dolls. I like what I'm doing. And if girls like this, mine must be more like girls." So the statement of trying to guide the John isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. Look for the homework, the way that we as pastors and churches can support their parents in all of phases of child rearing. Learn and teach biblical masculinity and femininity and what that looks like and how that then interfaces with cultural norms. So the confusion is always this, and I may have told this story, but forgive me if I do, but it's the story of a little girl who was playing with her brother's trucks, and the dad thought his daughter must be either gay or transgender because she was aggressive and playing with her brother's trucks every night. She's only 3. He was encouraged then to find out what she's doing, how she's playing with them. And once he did that, he realized, she said, "Daddy, my brother, I'm pushing him away because he's rough with these trucks. He keeps banging them into each other and running them over, leaving them upside down, running them into the dirt. And then then he starts piling them up like this, and they are so tired he won't stop. So I have to push them away because they need to go to bed, and I'm putting them to bed. So the dad saw this thing of a masculine sort of culturally masculine toy being played with in a very feminine way, but he didn't know what she was doing. He didn't until he asked. That's what the point is, draw out that biblical masculinity when you see that, or femininity in the child. Help parents understand what that looks like and how to draw that out and affirm that in them. That's a huge piece of it. Also, same-sex attraction does not equal gay. Transgender confusion does not equal transgender identity. You can experience same-sex attraction or gender confusion, but not have that label of gay or transgender. Those are ideologies and identities. So I've just like spewed a lot of stuff in the last few minutes, but guys, we have to stand behind our parents. We have to teach them. But first we have to have that culture where they're willing to come to you and say, Pastor, do you have resources? Can you pray with me? Because they're ashamed of themselves. They're playing the blame game. What did I do wrong? They don't want their child to be looked at differently either. So there are all these emotions besides the sort of grieving process of thinking their hopes and dreams of their kid is dashed. Remember, it's always about the gospel. I say this every time. It boils down to the gospel and the need for that. And then we work up from there. And your parents who come to you with the hopeless look in their eye, the pain that they are experiencing because their child has just announced this, it's not over. There is help, because the Lord really has plans for those kids. We need to help them walk in that plan. And that doesn't come just from accountability and all that. That's another story. So guys, I don't want to take up more of the time than there's so much to say on this. Please, next week we can continue sort of this, as well as we step in also to the sort of practical pieces, because this is all pretty practical as well. Love the parents, help them love their kids, and learn and grow. If you have any specific questions, any situations I can help you navigate, reach out to me. We'll talk it through in situations in your church or personal situations. That's kind of what this ministry does. So I'll turn it back over to Jason now, and we can go into the breakouts.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate you sharing that. Hey, what I want to do today, just because in the summer months, we usually have a lower attendance than we usually do, I'd like to all just stick around right here in this room and do some community Q&A. So what I'm going to do is open this up to a gallery view and just see if any of you have got a question for Jim. And this can be as general or as specific as you choose for it to be. It can be, hey, hypothetically, what about this? Or, hey, I've got a family in my church that's going through this. I hate to refer to Jim as a resource, but he's a wealth of knowledge in this area. And so if you've got a specific question for him, again, as general or specific as you would like for it to be, let's just stick around here for a little bit and take some general Q&A for Jim. Does anybody have a question for him? You can throw it in the chat, or you can unmute your mic. Adam, go ahead. I see your hand if you want to unmute and ask away.
Sure. So I really appreciate what all you were saying, but one thing that when you brought it up from the idea of a parent approaching you, it's sort of from the perspective of a parent that is on the same page as you. What if you have a kid that comes to church and their parent is completely fine with it, okay with it? Maybe they're not even a Christian or go to the church themselves. How would you then approach the child or teenager that's struggling with their sexual identity, but their parents aren't on the same page as you are?
Sure. Great point. I think that's where, if the parent is allowing them to come to church, there's an element of trust on some level. So if the youth usually, but the child comes and says something about their struggle or talks about it, that's when we still have to talk about the biblical view. So we don't criticize the child, but we ask more questions, give them a chance to process. For the parent, it's if they're not on the same page, the parent probably already knows what's happening with their child. And we as pastors, I think, are called to point them toward the gospel first, and then help them navigate their sort of questions or what they're seeing as their identity as through those lenses. But it's always gets back to the gospel, because that's ultimately our job as the church. And then that's also an opportunity to parents get involved. It's an opportunity for us to then share the gospel on a broader level or a different level. I think sometimes we go into it with a defeatist attitude, like, oh, they'll never listen, or they won't understand. If we are treated as the old Thursday night visitation kind of approach, where we're going to, this is an opportunity to present gospel and aspects of it, I think it's a good opportunity too.
Awesome. Good question. Good answer. One of the questions Chris Rule put in the chat is, what are some encouraging things that you say to parents right off the bat? One of the things you said at the beginning, Jim, was just the concept of we deal with the parent first before the child. And so when Chris asked that, what are things that you say just starting out in a conversation along these lines with a parent like that?
Great question. One of the first things you can kind of tell, usually you can read them, it's not your fault. This is not a result of your bad parenting. Don't blame yourself, those kinds of things, because that often that comes with, that's where the shame is coming. That's where the pain is coming from. A lot of places, like, what did I do wrong? How did I miss this? All of those things. And number two is, there's no shame in this. Talk to me about your heart. Tell me what you're feeling, and let's take it before the Lord and pray. I always remind them that the only perfect parent is God, and look at his kids. How do we turn out? That sounds a little glib, but at the same time, I've seen a lot of people just kind of sigh, exhale in relief in that. So those are just a couple of encouraging things right off the bat, is to help them understand that it's not necessarily something they did wrong. And the other thing is that this is not a permanent state, necessarily a permanent state. God is bigger than all of it.
Good. Really good answers. Really good question. What else? Anything else you guys have got for Jim as far as Q&A? Yeah, Kylie.
I was recently made aware of a TikTok challenge that's going on this month because it's Pride Month. And it's basically a challenge to come out as LGBTQ during Pride Month. So like, this is the time, if you're really proud, then come out. And it's, this initiative to recruit more people to identify as LGBTQ. And of course, there's tons of studies on the effects of social media. What would you say the influence of social media has been for perpetuating this lifestyle? And then how should parents react to that?
Yeah, I would say I don't have numbers, because I don't believe, honestly, I don't believe many of the polls now, because they're all going to be skewed. But I will say this: social media has a huge impact on the thinking, formulating the thinking of kids. The research that has been done, where psychologists have and therapists have actually reported some things, we're seeing that the transgenderism especially is socially driven in so many ways, and they find that first connection online in social media. They also find teenagers especially tend to, and you all know this, they tend to judge themselves, compare themselves to what they're seeing on social media. So if they already feel a little different, they already feel less than perfect, insecure about themselves, social media feeds into that. So where can they go once they find another avenue, a place where they do fit in? They're willing to jump in, even if they don't, because they don't understand anything other than, I feel like an outcast, I'm finding a place to belong, and that's where I want to be. I believe that also that the sort of parents do need to guard and be diligent about what their kids' age appropriateness, what their kids are being part of in terms of action of social media, what kind of filters are on there. I've heard many, well, in fact, 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a ministry leader whose daughter just came out to them, and she's 15, I think, and she got the information off of TikTok. That's where she made her connection. That's where she started to feel that. There are those social media devices that are actually worse than others. That's one of them. Facebook is kind of innocuous and boring now, and there's a reason for that. The kids don't love that as much. They go for the edgy, they go for the pieces. So for parents, the response to social media is monitor it. And because you can go on social media, and we all know this, all you have to do is, if you're on it, you may not be looking at anything wrong, but things pop up. You get to click on whatever you want to click on. And that draws kids into other areas of curiosity. So curiosity can lead to identity. It really can. If they're curious, they start looking at things on social media, that takes them to other websites, all of those things. They're being told it's wrong. So and posting things like girl on girl kisses or boy on boy kiss or those kind of challenges that come up, it just desensitizes and normalizes behavior that honestly cannot be seen as normal. I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about their behavior. And that's a hard distinction for the people to understand, but that's kind of what I'm saying.
Really good. Nick threw a question into the chat. Jim, besides you as a resource for parents, what are some initial places, additional resources we can turn to begin equipping ourselves and our parents with resources to share when people come and talk to us? You sent a PDF of a lot of good resources that we shared last week, but just off the top of your head, what are some things geared specifically to parents that you would recommend as resources, maybe small group material, something along those lines? Anything you've got there for us?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you there would be a small group curriculum that would help this topic for parents, like an 8-week course or something. I haven't found anything specifically to teach them sort of what I was talking about, biblical masculinity, femininity. Those are things that I'm finding across the board as I'm just trying to dabble in developing something that those views are all over the place. I like Larry Crabb's view. John Eldridge, those people that have kind of given some basics that are well known and trusted through biblical terms. But for parents, I'm just looking over here. Minnesota Family Council put out this parent resource guide and it's mostly for transgender ideology, but it's excellent in terms of, and it's just on its PDF and it's page after page, but it's on their website of genderresourceguide.com. I'll just throw it here. And it gives some excellent resources. It gives some excellent information about what's being taught and how to combat that.
Awesome. Hey, Justin, I saw your hand raised. If you want to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. All right. So I got a little curveball question. And I need to set just a little bit of background. My daughter went from homeschool into a public school environment in 5th grade. And being from our family, we didn't necessarily push much in dating. And so the idea and the slogan she said, as soon as people at school would ask her, who's your boyfriend, everything is like, I'm not ready to get married, because that's the joke that we would tell. And so when she entered that sphere, after a couple of guys, interested in her, asking her, hey, you want to go to this? And she said, no. They started asking the question, hey, are you gay? And so she told me, after a bunch of depression issues and such like that in 6th grade, she said, every single one of my friends that I hang out with now would identify as something other than heterosexual. Because that was the ones that would welcome her in, because not that she didn't have an interest in boys, it just wasn't strong and pronounced in 5th grade or 6th grade. So my question is, coming into that, and we because of that, we've had as many as 4 or 5 of our teenagers come into our church who would identify as something other than heterosexual, that were friends of hers that she got into the church. And I'm wondering, do we take a serious approach, knowing that some of this is being accentuated by the fact that that boys still have cooties in some cases, and so they're being told, well, you have to be gay in that case. Do we try and take this ultra seriously, or in some of these cases, especially with middle schoolers, do we kind of stand back and say, you know what, let's just not talk about relationships at all until you're better prepared to deal with what exactly you like, so they don't get typecasted before it's too late? Like, how do you approach in that middle school age and younger, even elementary?
Yeah, and that's huge. And it's always surprising me that those conversations are happening, with among the kids that age, but it is. There's power in the words from other kids labeling. So I get that. So I think to your point, let's get to your point of the younger middle school coming into your church, and they're coming in based, of course, your daughter, but they're identifying as something other than heterosexual. I don't necessarily think it needs to be given more weight than they give it. But I do believe that for me, I'm not a proponent of, hey, I just want to create a wholesome place for kids to hang out on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night. What I do want is to make sure they get some teaching. So whatever you would teach middle schoolers anyway about relationship would be taught, through the biblical lens. And it's not a bad idea to, I would say, within teaching process, especially, is to point out the fallacy of the world, the cultural push to label somebody just because they don't follow a certain pattern. So I don't think there's anything wrong with those kinds of teachings, but if we can teach it from the God view of the goodness of God and is good and right and all that, as opposed to your friends or your peers are all wrong, it's like, this is what is right, and go from that angle. But I do think it needs to, if we don't, in other words, if you let it play out, there may be the missed opportunity of, again, these young people learning the gospel, because ultimately that is what it is. So you don't want to have hyper focus, but you don't want to ignore it either, and just teach it from the biblical perspective, why it matters. That's my feeling.
Great response. Hey, I've got Tim with his hand raised next. Tim, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Thanks. One thought, I grew up in Fairfax County, Virginia, which is right beside Loudoun County. It's been in the news a lot, very liberal. In sixth grade, which was elementary for me, we took a sex ed class, and they said, you're born gay. And it was very confusing to me, because I grew up in Sunday school. I know what my parents thought. And, just hearing that was like, oh, what? I believe my teacher, and I never talked to my parents about it, but, it was quite difficult. So I just kind of wanted to share that. I know, that's just something I personally experienced and never had a thought outside of the teacher sharing that. And I can just imagine how much society is today. But my question is just historically, I know there's a lot of perversion in Corinth and different things. I don't know if you've studied that, Jim. Are we dealing with things consistent throughout history, or is this a very different type situation with social media and stuff?
Yeah, I think it is a different situation. It's amped up like crazy. It's not that homosexuality, for lack of a better way to put it, even some gender confusion hasn't always existed, but it is being fostered and groomed, and I call it a tsunami of it, because it's not just because it's more prevalent that people are stepping into it. There is an undergirding of humanity. I mean, the gender confusion thing just rips out every foundation of human thinking. All right. It's like, if I can't tell if I'm a boy or girl at a young age, if I have to decide that one, I don't even know what that means. Which is what the push is, and how I'll ever understand sexuality and all of that. So I think the loosening, if you will, the decay of morality in society has played into this sort of, you can go back into biblical times now, but because the difference is that I don't know, at least in scripture, it doesn't tell us about homosexual activity as being an identity. It's only an activity. And we're taking it that place further, that you need to identify and embrace and be driven by, this is your core identity. But that's the biggest difference. The prevalence of it is it becomes popular, it becomes that, but it doesn't mean that we've always had all these people running around that were suppressed homosexuals. It simply means that, and in a sense there are, I mean, because we are born into a human condition and a fallen world. So there's always going to be that sort of brokenness. And this is just basically open the floodgates to say whatever you want to do. And I know that there are guys, I've heard more than one case where a guy has been, that pornography actually married to 3 situations where a married man went into a gay relationship because of pornography, and he never before had, but the pornography addiction had led him into other areas and other ways of thinking and taking him down this road. And then he decided to go into a gay relationship because of that. So it's not this whole inbred thing that you can go to scripture and argue that as well. So yeah, the born gay thing is an important factor, because what's happening is Christians now are just referring to people as LGBT people, as that is their personhood. And that is dangerous, because now that puts up a smokescreen of all sorts and a way to destroy the voice of the church. So
That was a great thought you just said about it was always mentioned as an activity as opposed to an identity. I've not heard it spoken that way before, but that was very well said. Andrew, let's go to you. Unmute and ask Jim your question.
Mine's kind of a difficult question, I guess, to formulate exactly what I'm trying to ask, but mine kind of tags on to what Justin was saying. How much emphasis do you put in this area? Because I've got a couple parents, one specifically, that is at this point unwilling to admit that their child is struggling in this area. And so we don't have the room to try to speak into the life of, I say child, he's 17 now, but don't want to make any mention of it because the parents are very adamant. My child is not struggling here, but we're hearing that this child is, come out to everybody except his church community. And it's been very difficult to get the parents on board because we don't want to upset them. And, there's been, well, it's just a phase and, all that kind of stuff. How much do you push that? How much do you say, no, we really believe your child is, because I don't want to address the child until I have the parents' consent.
Right. So if the child came to you with something, then you would basically halt the conversation and say, well, let's talk, just bring your parents into it. Right. Because that's just kind of the protocol, if you will. So that makes sense. I think, the denial piece from the parents, it depends on the relationship you have with them. But man, I'm just saying this young man's eternity is at stake. And we cannot take it seriously enough. The ramifications of a young man who struggles with same-sex attraction, who is now saying to his friends, I am gay, implying that he is about to step into, or maybe already has, this whole identity piece, because there's not and especially if now obviously he's in your church, but what is he doing with the faith? Here's what you can do with him in the way that you would anybody else. You can do with him is the discipleship piece. How is his personal walk with the Lord? Does he have one? Has he ever made a profession of faith? That actually can drive everything about how you would relate to this young man. And then in your teachings, you can still have right now, if you did a teaching from the stage, so to speak, he's going to feel like you're picking on him. He's going to feel shameful and all that because he'll like, oh, they're talking about me. Unless you do it in such a way that it's so broad, that's it. But I think the main thing for this kid is from him, the gospel. It's about his relationship, his faith walk, and from the parents, a little more conversation, if they'll let you, with them, saying, do you understand where this is going to head for your kid? If we don't sort of, and it doesn't mean that you're telling them we need to get him conversion therapy. This simply means this needs to be open dialogue with the family and with the church, if you can do that, so that he can express his how did he land here? He believes, and then it's going to be a long road. If he's already come to that point, it's going to be a long road to help to even to get him to want to do any of this. But that's where the Holy Spirit comes in.
Good question. Hey, before we go to Philip, one of the questions I missed in the chat was from Chris Rule. How would you counsel parents who have a child or other family members who want to be referred to with different pronouns? You covered that a little bit in the LGBTQ webinar, but how would you address the pronouns as it relates to a family member, Jim?
If it's a child, especially a child, and it's a parent-child relationship, guys, I can't even imagine calling my son or daughter something other than who they are, even if they think they're something else. That is simply feeding a delusion. And I just in all good conscience couldn't even advise that we do that. The world culture says, oh, you're going to drive them to certain to suicidal thoughts and all that. I'm thinking, I don't really believe that. Because as a parent, don't we have some sort of influence on what is influencing them to get to that point? All that to say, Laura Beth, who, if you were at the webinar, you heard her speak. She's told me before that it was her parents, her mom and dad, who would not play into that and wouldn't call her Jake and wouldn't call her he or him. Irritated her, but it was her only tether to reality, because that child, especially a child who says, I'm not a girl, I'm actually a boy. Ultimately, we can't just give it and do that. Ultimately, it needs conversation, it needs discussion, communication. That is sometimes hard, because when you're talking about somebody who is a teenager, we also have the teenage sort of rebellion and all of those things going on. As a young child, though, that's the perfect opportunity to guide the child, to parent them into the truth of who they are, which is not male or female. We, as a pastor, we can strengthen our parents by having them think through. You don't have to tell them, you help them think through the logic of that. Just because, did your kid ever want to be Batman? Did he want to be a pirate? You're going to let him cut off his leg? The absurdity of what happens and what culture is buying into is something that we need to consider and we teach against as well. So I would, but how do you handle the pronouns? I suggest, in the context of good, solid conversation and relationship, that we don't buy into that. Now, when it's the barista at Starbucks, I'm not going to get into the conversation my first time around. I'm not going to say you're all wrong. If it's my niece or nephew and the parents are affirming that, if I have a relationship with that niece or nephew, I would like to have a conversation with them expressing my discomfort. I might give into it at that point, but probably not. Here's the thing, with sometimes it is we're the only representative of Jesus Christ that person will ever have in their lives. And how can we best reach them at the heart level? So that's where the ambiguity for me comes in. That's where the gray area is. And Dr. Yohan's book, Holy Sexuality, Christopher's book, is an excellent resource. He's actually developing something for parents who hope to be out in the fall, that is directed at I believe the church actually preparing the parents. So that's, just keep your eye out for that, because if he's doing it, it's going to be quality. And we're actually doing something for teens, but that's way in the books. But somebody just mentioned there in the chat. I just wanted to reiterate that, that's something he's working on. His goal is to have it in the fall sometime.
Yeah, that'll be a great resource. Philip, I'll go to you if you want to unmute.
So a couple of things. One would be a follow-up to Chris's question about the pronouns and such. I have a lady in our church who is a public school teacher, and she has a student who wants to be identified as something other than what God made her. And she came to me, this teacher came to me and said, I don't feel that in my conscience I can call her by, he, him, and all of this. And she said, what do I do? And my understanding is that in the public schools, they kind of have to go with the flow with that. And I'm not really positive on that, but I'm reaching out to like Pacific Justice Institute and all of that to find legally what she might be required to do. But on a personal basis, my answer to her was Jesus met people where they are, and because her influence is in the context of the school, show her the love of Jesus in everything she does, but don't make an issue of that then and there. Just love her as an individual and let the love of Jesus cross those barriers. Would you say anything different about that? And then I've got something, one other thing I was going to say.
I would not. That is an excellent, response, because we have to remember what our context is and what our role is, and how impactful. So if our goal is to point them to the love of Jesus, and we absolutely refuse to and tell them they're not who they say they are, without the context of a deep, rich relationship, it would be. So yeah, I think that's a good point. She refers as little as possible to where she has to use the pronouns, but she just respects the college, builds a relationship as a teacher can.
Absolutely. Yeah. The other thing is the way that we have. I've found that with topics like this, subjects like this, the more we focus on it, the bigger the issue becomes, and the more little spin-off problems there may be, and all of this. And as you've said many times, keeping the gospel central to it all, it really seems to be making the most difference. For instance, we were doing a study through Judges recently, and got to talking about the guy who gave his concubine to the men who came beating at the door, and as we talked about that, how that it was sin, and all of these things, and we didn't just focus on the sin of the men saying, give me that man that came into you, but we showed that every bit of it was sin, and didn't magnify homosexuality above anything else. It helped to clarify in the hearts and minds of some of the people that were kind of struggling with this in their heart, that homosexuality is not a worse sin than any other form of adultery or fornication or anything. It's a sin, and it just needs to be dealt with. And investing in the lives of these individuals, like we got a young girl that's coming to our teen program that she's kind of struggled with same-sex attraction and everything. In the teachings and the conversations, we haven't focused on that. We focused on Jesus and his love for her, and God is really working in her heart. And personally, I would encourage anybody, and what we're trying to do is encourage our couples that have healthy, godly relationships to come alongside some of these young people, the teenagers, the college students, and invest in them, and show them what a godly relationship is really all about. So, would you have anything to specifically to counsel that focus in those relationships, those mentoring relationships?
Again, it's those mentoring relationships. That's a great point to have, and a great involvement of couples who are godly couples, moral couples, who are living their lives and pouring into someone else and helping them understand what masculine, feminine in God's perspective is all about, and then drawing them in, drawing that young person in. The difference that I see homosexuality in other sins is that it has the ramifications, the tentacles, if you will, far reaching into identity and all that. But again, the focus. So if you focus on like a whole sermon on and those kinds of things, it builds resistance as opposed to what we're trying to do often enough. So I'll tell you a difference though, just a plug here, but for the seminar that we do, what I've heard from pastors that actually help shift the culture of their church to open conversations, because we're not saying focus on that. What we're saying is get to build grace and truth relationships. That actually helps to do that. So I think we're on the same page in terms of that. We're looking at the individual, how do we meet them? Just like Jesus did, meeting them where they are.
Yeah, I'm excited about Dr. Yuan, or however you say it, his curriculum that he's coming out with, because it is something I believe needs to be taught. It's just the context and how we approach it, I think, is very important. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Good. Hey, one other question we got in the chat. Jim, what would you say would be the first 2 steps that a parent should take when a child first tells you that they're gay? You've got a kid in your house that says, I'm gay. In addition to prayer, what would be your quick 1-2 punch to dealing with that child?
You know, I love you regardless. Your mom and I love you regardless. And I appreciate your honesty in what you're telling us. And I want to know more. Can we talk?
Good. Kind of take that model of help me understand where you're coming from.
Absolutely. Don't make it about ourselves and our own. The parent can't make it about themselves or their own concerns as much as, wow, recognizing that was tough for the kid.
Yeah. Okay. We've got one more. Anybody got one more question? It's about all we got time for. Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to make this quick. We have a Christian school here, and we were trying to, as this whole thing is kind of snowballing, and us trying to get ahead of it with some preventative curriculum. Where we put that in our scope and sequence, we thought, man, once they get off the elementary hall, maybe 7th or 8th grade. And then this last year, we had 6 individuals in our 7th and 8th grade that said, man, I'm already struggling with this. So as we start to consider backing that up into the elementary, we run into those Christian school type homes that say, I don't want you addressing this. This is why we pulled out of the public school, because I don't want you talking about this kind of stuff. Is there just a quick resource that isn't necessarily talking towards those parents that already have a child like this, but is just good biblical worldview curriculum that addresses it in our current culture? Obviously, our Christian curriculum talks about creation and who we are naturally, but we feel like we need to address it a little bit more head on, because they're hearing this. These parents that say we don't want our kids hearing this, but then they give them social media and they're hearing it all the time from the other angle.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the inconsistency of the parenting piece. They don't recognize what they're not seeing. They don't recognize where the influence is coming from. And it's absolutely there. So if you can convince them of that, I just sent just typing in this helpforfamilies.com, Denise Schick has developed some things for kids. It's kind of on a kid's level. There's several different resources within that. So just go to that website, do some navigating, and you can see if it's something that can fit, but it might actually help you address it in a way that parents might be more comfortable.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Jim, I really appreciate you being with us today, and I enjoyed the format of just the continued Q&A. I just threw his email address again back into the chat. If you guys want to reach out to him directly, he's making himself available to us, and I appreciate you doing that, Jim. One final thing I've got for you guys. What's up next? Jim is going to be with us one more week. You don't want to miss next week. We've talked about the pastor's perspective, the parent's perspective. Next week, we're going to delve into our people's perspective. How can we equip our people in a practical sense of dealing with their kids, dealing with the friends of their kids that their kids are bringing home, like the social media culture? What are some practical things that we can arm our people with? Pride Month, we've been inundated with, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this. What about from our side? How can we arm the people in our church? That's what Jim's going to be covering next week. You do not want to miss that. Jim, thanks again for being with us today and really the last 2 weeks and just spending time settling into a conversation with us. Appreciate you being with us. And we put his email out there. Feel free to reach out to him in the downtime between now and next week. But Jim, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for showing up today. I hope this was a help to you, and I hope you guys have a great week thinking outside the box. We'll see you next Tuesday.
See you guys.